Ladies and gentlemen, we are officially in 2024. This is the modern era of gaming, the future of gaming, but time after time I find myself going back to the classics, and I still think my favorite handheld console of all time is the Game Boy Advance. So in this video I'm going to break down what I think are the top 10 best Game Boy Advance games of all time. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Yeah, the Game Boy Advance is probably my favorite handheld console of all time. I like the Game Boy Advance SP, but either one is fine. Funny enough, I'm not really a game collector. I just buy games, play them, and then resell them and put that money towards my next game. But the one console that I randomly collect for is Game Boy Advance. And just right here, I have two sealed copies of Charlotte's Web and Ed Nettie. They're not rare or anything, but they're just things that I hold on to. So in this video, we're going to go over what I think are the 10 best Game Boy Advance games. Before we get started, if you could, hit a like and subscribe, it would really mean the world to me. And let's go ahead and get right into this video. So you have a couple of Pokemon games you could choose from on the Game Boy Advance, but the absolute best one, in my opinion, is Pokémon Emerald. Ruby and Sapphire are fine, and Fire, Red, and Leaf Green are also great, but Pokemon Emerald just seems like the definitive way to go. I recently beat this, probably a month or two ago, and I couldn't believe how amazing this game was and how great it still held up. And it reminds me of why I'm a fan of the classic style of Pokemon games over the modern style, because it just felt like they cared, you know what I mean? They wanted to do the best that they could do. I just loved everything about this. The legendary Pokemon, the villains in this one, the story, the feeling, the locations, the music. In my opinion, it's probably a perfect Pokemon game, and that's hard to do nowadays. So yeah, if you've never played this one, what are you doing? Go and play it. So Zelda is my favorite franchise of all time, and the Zelda game that I'm playing handheld currently is the Minish Cap. I'm actually playing it on this little handheld console I was sent to review, and I'm at the final boss, and I have not beat it yet. But where do we start? Every Zelda game is pretty much a good game, right? This one is weird because it was developed by Capcom, and I don't know what they did, but they made a perfect handheld Zelda game. There's going to be a theme in this video, and I'm going to repeat myself often, but I don't feel bad doing it. One of the greatest things about the greatest Game Boy Advance games, they make these massive worlds and massive games with just smaller versions of them. And this is truly one of the best Zelda games of all time. The world is where this one shines. The whole world and Hyrule and all that, it's a lot of fun. And the Pickery and the forest and the deserts and everything, that's great. But when you put on the hat and you shrink down to a tiny little Zelda, the same size as a bug, it's I would find myself smiling often and just feeling so charmed about this game. And if you're a fan of Zelda and you have not played this one, you need to go back and play it. It holds up just as good as modern Zelda games. So, Mario Kart Super Circuit. This is also one of the greatest Game Boy Advance games of all time. A fun fact about this is the third Mario Kart game ever created. And that feels weird. We went from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64, and you would think there would be something else, but it was on the Game Boy Advance where we got the next entry. I remember playing this game on my Game Boy Advance and just being so blown away, I felt like I was in the future. How am I possibly playing a Mario Kart game on this tiny little handheld console that didn't even have a backlit screen at the time? I would play this until my batteries would die in my Game Boy Advance. There's not a lot to me explaining this one. If you've played Mario Kart, you know what it is, but there's something very charming about this version of Mario Kart. So a game that could have a whole 10-hour video done on it and you probably still wouldn't say everything is Metroid Fusion. And just going off memory, I could be wrong, but I think this is a remake of the first Metroid game, at least if memory serves correct. It's the same thing that I was saying before, I couldn't believe that I was playing Metroid on this tiny little console. It almost felt badass back in the day. I felt so cool. You know that meme? It's I'm not like the other people. They don't understand me. It's that's how I felt. I'd be at the playground playing my Game Boy at school and be they don't understand that I'm sitting over here playing a Metroid game. They could never understand what it's like. It just felt like it was impossible. But it was happening. And again, I would argue this is one of the best Metroid games of all time. I could never do it justice in this video, but it easily found a spot on this list. The Game Boy Advance surprisingly has tons of great RPGs. There's tons to pick, and picking one for this list, you're leaving off 100. You know what I mean? But the one that truly resonated with me the most is Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Very recently we got Mario RPG remade on the Switch, and that is cool, but the game that I wish they would have remade was this game right here. Mario and Luigi just works as such a good concept for an RPG. Like, the game is great, and it feels almost like a standard Mario game, except that it's an RPG, but somehow being an RPG translates so well, and Mario and Luigi are the perfect duo for this adventure. When I was making this list, some games would pop up immediately in my head, and this is one that did just that. And just talking about it in this video right now makes me want to go back and play this, because I'll admit it's probably been over a decade since I've played this game, but just going back off memory, it's an amazing adventure, and you need to play this one. So I've been skating my whole life, and I've played every skateboarding game pretty much since the beginning, but one of my favorite is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 on Game Boy Advance. This is another game where I just could not believe that I was playing it handheld. And while there are some big differences, like the levels aren't one for one, they're almost in this weird isometric view, and there's some stuff they had to take out and some stuff they had to finesse to make it work. I really couldn't tell a difference at the time when I was playing it. I was just thinking, wow, I normally had to play this on my PS1. Now I can play it in the car, on the go. Like, this is another game that I would easily just run out the batteries in my Game Boy Advance. And while I could see that time had affected it some, it was still just as fun as I remembered, and I just can't believe that they did this back in the day. Like, it's so impressive. Like, hearing the little music and skating around and just having fun. I don't know. I think this is probably the way that I actually prefer to play Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 now. So one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I'm not even joking when I say this, is Super Monkey Ball. I don't know what it is about it, but it's just my feel-good, like, be happy game. And nothing's going to be too serious, and you shouldn't be rage quitting for any reason. You're just going to have a really fun gaming time. And Super Monkey Ball Jr. on Game Boy Advance did just that. Like, the same feeling that I would feel when I would play this on GameCube, or even when I play it on the Switch now, is the same exact feeling I got on Game Boy Advance. Like, looking back on Game Boy Advance games, you're probably like, well, they were fun, but they weren't as big or as great as I remembered. That's not the case here at all. I'm still very impressed at how much they fit into this game. If you're collecting for Game Boy Advance, or you just want to go back and play some of the classics, this is a game that you absolutely need to play. So tactical games I can either take or leave. Like, they're fun, but not all of them are for me. But one of the best is Advance Wars. And we finally got a remake on the Switch, and it kind of came and went under the radar. Maybe it was because the release date was held like in limbo and we didn't know what was going on with it. Playing Advance Wars on Game Boy Advance, I was truly addicted to this game. I really felt like I was in control of an army, and I would take it so serious, and I would like feel bad when some of my characters would get defeated, or I wouldn't plan out an attack right, or the other people would plan a better attack than me. And I don't know, like, I think it helped my little adolescent brain grow somehow. And I think that was great, that there was a game here, but it really challenged you to use your brain. And there's not much I can say for this one. Like, it's an Advance Wars game. It's not too deep of a concept, but it is really fun, and I think this version still holds up really well to this day. So it seems like every great franchise made an appearance on the Game Boy Advance, and another great Game Boy Advance game is Sonic Adventure 2. One of the main problems that Sonic faced back in the day when they had be ported to handheld consoles is they would feel sluggish, or like there was a little bit of delay in controls, but I never had that problem in this one. The gameplay really felt great and fluid, and it felt like a real Sonic game, like it was really fast and adventurous. Again, going off memory, I'm pretty sure there's like 4 or 5 characters in this one, and every single one of those characters have like their own like abilities and attributes. If you've played a Sonic game, you know what you're getting into, right? But it was just so weird playing this on the Game Boy Advance. Like, it felt like it was the console that it was supposed to be on, and once I got my Game Boy Advance SP and played this game, and the screen was lit up and I could see all the colors, I would argue it's one of the best looking Game Boy Advance games of all time. So for the final entry on this list, I mean, what do I pick, right? There's so many great games to choose from. But what if the game that I choose isn't a game? It's actually one of the best features of the Game Boy Advance, and I'm talking about Game Boy Advance Video. I cannot believe that this was a real thing at the time. I truly felt like the coolest person when I had these. I had my own movie theater basically in my pocket. Anything you can think of had a Game Boy Advance Video. They had movies like Shrek and Shark Tale, and then they had shows like Jimmy Neutron, Pokemon, SpongeBob, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Dragon Ball Z. And the cool thing about it is they would have like these compilations, so they would have like a Nickelodeon one or a Cartoon Network one, and it would have like multiple episodes of multiple shows on this little cartridge. Yes, they do not hold up. They're like 10 frames per second or something. And my little kid brain couldn't tell the difference. You gotta remember, this is back in the day, like 2002, 2003. So TVs really weren't what they were today. There was no flat screens and HD TVs. So this really wasn't much different than what you had in your standard household. This is arguably probably one of my favorite gaming concepts of all time. And anytime I see one of these out in the wild when I'm like game hunting or something, it brings an instant smile to my face. This is a look back on what I think are the 10 best games / video thing of the Game Boy Advance. There's so much to choose from. Now I ask you, if you played a Game Boy Advance, what color Game Boy Advance did you have? Did you have the Game Boy Advance or the Game Boy Advance SP? And what is your favorite Game Boy Advance game of all time? I would seriously love to hear from you guys. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you could. I'd really appreciate a follow, because we're growing on both platforms slowly, but we are growing, and that's really cool. And you guys know me. I'll see you soon with a new video. Peace out.